She walked into that ballroom with $43 in her bank account, a dress she'd worn to her mother's funeral, and absolutely no idea that the most dangerous man in Boston was about to decide she belonged to him. That decision would cost both of them everything. If the story already has you holding your breath, hit that like button right now, drop your city in the comments below, and let me watch this story travel. Now stay with me, because what happens next will change the way you think about power, survival, and the terrifying thing that happens when two broken people find each other in the dark. Okay. Vivian Mercer had exactly one rule for surviving the kind of night that could either save her life or finish destroying it. Don't let them see you sweat. She broke that rule approximately 4 minutes after walking through the doors of the Harrington Grand Ballroom. It wasn't the chandeliers that rattled her, though they were obscene. Hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of Austrian crystal suspended above the heads of people who would spend more on wine tonight than Vivian had earned in the last 6 months combined. It wasn't the orchestra playing something European and sorrowful in the corner, or the women draped in jewelry that probably had names and histories attached to them. It wasn't even the way the event staff looked straight through her like she was a smudge on the marble floor, rather than a person who had been personally invited. It was the simple, devastating fact that she did not belong here, and every single person in this room already knew it. She could feel it the way you feel weather changing, something barometric and instinctive, pressure shifting against her skin. The room had a frequency, and she was vibrating at the wrong one. Vivian accepted a glass of champagne from a passing tray, not because she wanted it, but because holding something gave her hands somewhere to be. She moved toward the edge of the room with the practiced casualness of someone who had spent a lifetime learning how to look purposeful when she was actually just trying not to drown. The champagne was good. She barely tasted it. Her mind was running calculations she didn't want to be running. The electric bill that was now 12 days past due, the 2 interviews that had gone nowhere this week, the number on her bank app that she'd stopped checking because the number no longer felt real. $43. She'd counted it this morning with the particular focused attention of someone performing a ritual, the way you count things when you need the act of counting to hold some meaning. She was here because of Margaret Holt, her former supervisor at the architectural firm where Vivian had worked for 3 years before the layoffs came through in waves, and her position disappeared in the second one. Margaret, who felt guilty about it even though she'd had nothing to do with the decision, who had called last week with an invitation to this gala, a charity benefit for urban housing initiatives, which was almost funny given Vivian's current relationship with housing, and said, "Come, Viv, there are people here you should meet. You never know." Margaret had meant well. Margaret always meant well. Vivian had said yes because she had run out of reasons to say no to anything that might possibly, theoretically, against all reasonable probability, lead somewhere better than where she currently was. So here she stood in the Harrington Grand Ballroom in a black dress she'd worn to bury her mother 4 years ago, with $43 to her name and a champagne flute she was using as a prop, watching Boston's most powerful people orbit each other with the ease of people who had never once in their lives had to calculate whether they could afford to eat this week. She spotted Margaret across the room and started moving toward her, threading through clusters of expensive perfume and louder than necessary laughter, murmuring excuse me's that nobody acknowledged. She was maybe 20 feet away when she felt it. The sensation was so specific she almost stopped walking. Someone was watching her. Not the ambient social surveillance of a crowded room where eyes slide over you and move on. This was focused, deliberate, the particular weight of attention that has decided on its target and does not intend to look away. Vivian had felt that kind of attention exactly twice before in her life, both times in circumstances she did not enjoy remembering. She kept her face neutral and let her gaze drift in the direction the feeling was pulling her. Across the ballroom, standing slightly apart from a group of men in suits that probably cost more than her car, was a man she had never seen before. He was looking directly at her, not in the way men sometimes looked at women at events like this, that glancing, assessing sweep that was more inventory than interest. He was watching her the way you watch something that has caught you genuinely off guard. Still, focused, with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but was somehow, inexplicably, the opposite. He was younger than she'd expected for a man who radiated that particular quality of power. Late 30s at most, maybe her age, maybe a year or two older. Dark hair, strong jaw, a suit that fit him the way expensive suits fit men who are built rather than just dressed. There was nothing soft about him. Not his posture, not the set of his shoulders, not the careful stillness with which he stood while the people around him moved and talked and laughed at things Vivian couldn't hear. He looked like a man who had learned very early how to take up exactly as much space as he intended and not 1 inch more. Vivian looked away, looked back at Margaret, kept walking. She made it approximately 6 steps before she heard someone at her elbow say, quietly and without preamble, "You look like you're calculating the fastest exit." She turned. He was closer than she'd expected. He'd moved across a significant portion of the ballroom in the time it had taken her to walk 6 steps, which meant he'd moved quickly and with intention. Up close, the quality of him was even more pronounced. That stillness, that precision, something behind the eyes that was alert in a way that felt almost predatory and entirely controlled. "I was," Vivian said, because she'd been caught in lying about it seemed worse. "There are 3. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. The suggestion of one, maybe. The shadow of one. "Which one were you going with?" "Depends on how the next 10 minutes go." "Fair," he said. He didn't offer his hand or his name, just looked at her with that same focused attention that had pulled her gaze across the room. "You're not a regular." "Is that a question?" "No?" "Then no," she said. "I'm not." "What are you?" It was a strange question. Not, "What do you do?" or "Who do you know here?" The standard social sorting mechanisms of rooms like this. "What are you?" She held the champagne flute and thought about it for a second, which was probably not the expected response. "Currently," she said, "unemployed, overqualified for most of what's being advertised, behind on 2 bills. Here because a friend thought it might help, and I didn't have a good enough reason to stay home." She paused. "What are you?" The almost smile again, warmer this time. Or maybe just more visible, complicated. "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not." Someone nearby noticed him. She could tell by the way the energy in the room shifted, a subtle realignment the way iron filings move toward a magnet. A man in his 50s started crossing toward them with the practiced smile of someone who had important things to say. The man beside Vivian glanced at the approaching figure and then back at her. And something in the glance was deliberate, a choice being made. "Dance with me," he said. "I don't know your name." "Damien," he said. "Dance with me anyway." The man in his 50s had reached them now, hand extended, smile at full power. "Damien, there's someone I've been wanting to introduce you to." "Not tonight, Harlan," Damien said without looking at him. His eyes stayed on Vivian. The man called Harlan stopped. The smile stayed on his face, but something underneath it flickered and died. "Of course," he said, after a beat that lasted a half-second too long. "Of course. Enjoy your evening." He withdrew. Vivian watched him go and noticed, really noticed for the first time, how the crowd had arranged itself in relation to the man beside her, not gathered around him the way people cluster around someone famous or merely powerful, but carefully, consciously maintaining a specific distance, like the event horizon of something they respected but didn't entirely trust. "Who are you?" she asked. "I told you, Damien." "Damien what?" He looked at her. The directness of it was startling. No deflection, no performance, just 2 eyes deciding what to give her. "Moretti," he said. The name didn't mean anything to her, not in the first second. Then something in her memory stirred. A headline she'd scrolled past, a name mentioned in passing at the firm once in a context that had made 2 of her colleagues lower their voices, and she felt the first thin thread of something cold unspool in her stomach. "Oh," she said, "you know the name." "Peripherally." "And?" She looked at him. He was still watching her with that same quality of attention, steady, unhurried, as though her answer genuinely mattered, and he had all the time in the world to wait for it. "And you still haven't asked me properly," she said. He extended his hand. She took it. The orchestra was playing something slow and European and a little mournful when they reached the floor, and Vivian became aware, with the particular uncomfortable awareness of someone who has done something they cannot immediately undo, that the room had noticed, not subtly. She could feel it. the shifted weight of collective attention, the pause in a dozen nearby conversations. Damien Moretti apparently did not dance with anyone, or had not, until tonight. The significance of this was lost on her in the specifics, but communicated itself clearly enough through the fact that people were staring and doing a poor job of pretending otherwise. He danced the way he did everything else, controlled, economical, with a physical awareness that suggested a body that knew exactly what it was capable of. His hand at her back was firm without being possessive. His other hand held hers with a grip that was warm and still. "You're not afraid," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "I didn't say that. Most people can't look at me directly." "I noticed," she said. "It's a little sad, honestly." He looked at her with something that was now definitely closer to a smile. Real, surprised, the kind you don't prepare. "Sad. Everyone in this room treating you like you're some kind of weather event they need to route around. You've been standing in that corner for probably an hour, and nobody's actually talked to you." She paused. "Have they?" "No," he said. "So yeah," she said. "A little sad." They moved through the music in silence for a moment. She was aware of him in a way that was distracting. The solidity of him, the warmth, the smell of something clean and expensive. She was also aware of the $43 in her bank account, and the dress she'd buried her mother in, and the electric bill and the 12-day overdue notice, and tried to use those things to anchor herself to something sensible. "What did you do?" he asked. "Architecture, space planning mostly, commercial and residential. I was good at it." Past tense. "The firm had a bad year. Second round of cuts took my position." "How long?" 6 months. "That's a long time to be good at something and not be doing it." Something in her chest pressed. "Yes," she said. "It is." "What do you want?" Again, that direct phrasing. Not "what are you looking for?" or "what's your plan?" "What do you want?" She thought about giving him a practical answer. Stability, employment, a chance to work on something that mattered. All of that was true. But he was asking something else, she thought, or asking the practical question in a way that required a less practical answer. "To stop surviving," she said finally, "and start actually living something. I've been in emergency mode for so long I can't remember what the other mode feels like." He was quiet for a moment. "I know that mode," he said. She looked up at him. Something had shifted in his face. Not vulnerability exactly, but the particular flatness that replaces expression in people who have learned to wall certain things off. She had the sudden strong intuition that he meant exactly what he'd said, and that he had not said it to many people. The music ended. They stood on the floor while the room rearranged itself around them. He didn't release her hand. "Have dinner with me," he said. "I don't know you." "You know my name." "I know your name," she agreed. "I don't know anything else." "That can be fixed." She looked at him, at the room around them, still watching, still maintaining that careful, respectful distance. At Margaret, whom she could see across the ballroom wearing an expression that Vivian could not quite read, something between excitement and the particular concern of someone who knows something the other person doesn't. At the exits. She'd clocked 3 of them. The nearest was 40 feet to her left. "Where?" she said. The restaurant he took her to didn't have a sign on the door. This was the first thing Vivian noticed when the black car, not a taxi, not a rideshare, a private car with a driver who had appeared from nowhere with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been waiting, pulled up to a narrow building on a street in the South End that she'd walked past 100 times without registering. The door was black, the windows were opaque. There was a number above the door and nothing else. The second thing she noticed was that the man who opened the door for Damien looked at him. Not the way hospitality staff look at wealthy guests, but the way soldiers look at officers. Attentive, respectful, and slightly tense. Inside, the restaurant was small and warm and lit with the kind of lighting that costs significant money to make look effortless. Maybe 12 tables. All of them occupied by people who looked the way serious money looks when it stops performing. Quiet, unassuming, wearing clothes that were expensive in ways that didn't announce themselves. A woman at a corner table who Vivian was almost certain she recognized from a state government website. 2 men at another table who were speaking in a language she couldn't identify, who paused their conversation when Damien entered and gave him a small, specific nod. They were shown to a table in a private alcove without being asked what they wanted. Wine appeared. A menu appeared, Handwritten, one page, no prices. Vivian looked at the menu. She looked at the room. She looked at Damien. So, she said. So, he said, this is where you bring people to impress them. This is where I eat, he said. I'm not trying to impress you. What are you trying to do? He considered this with the seriousness it seemed to deserve. Understand you, he said. You're interesting to me. That doesn't happen often. Because most people are afraid of you. Because most people want something from me, he said simply. You don't. How do you know that? Because you told me exactly what you wanted, and none of it had anything to do with me. She thought about that. The wine was excellent. Something red and serious that she would have needed to look up to name. The food, when it came, was extraordinary. Not showy. Just exceptional. The kind of cooking that has nothing to prove. She ate with the slightly desperate attention of someone who had been surviving mostly on grocery store pasta for 2 months, tried to do it with dignity, and suspected she wasn't entirely succeeding. He noticed. She could tell he noticed. He didn't say anything about it. They talked for 3 hours. Not the way people talk at charity galas. All networking and performance and the careful exchange of information that might be useful later. They talk the way people talk when they've stopped calculating. About work, about the city, about the things that matter and the things that are supposed to matter, and the gap between those two categories. She told him about her mother, who had been an English teacher in Dorchester and had died of a stroke at 62 with a house full of books and a daughter who hadn't been home enough. He listened in a way that most people don't, completely, without the barely contained impatience of someone waiting for their turn. He told her about architecture. She hadn't expected that. He described it with a specificity and passion that told her it wasn't casual interest. The way load-bearing walls worked, the relationship between light and space. A particular Taro Ando building he'd seen in Japan at 22 that had, he said, rearranged something in how I understood structure. He talked about Boston's neighborhoods, the way certain blocks had been neglected in ways that compounded over decades, the relationship between physical environment and the behavior of the people living inside it. You wanted to be an architect, she said. Yes. What happened? The flatness again. Brief, controlled. Other obligations, he said. She didn't push it. She stored it instead, the way you store things that feel significant. It was past midnight when they left the restaurant. The car was waiting. The night was cold and clear in the particular way Boston gets in late autumn, with a wind off the harbor that had teeth. I should get home, she said. I'll have Marcus drive you. I can get a... Vivian. He said her name with a specificity that stopped her. He'd asked it, she realized, at some point during dinner, and she'd given it without the usual caution she applied to giving her name to men she'd just met. Let Marcus drive you. She looked at him. At the car. At the driver, Marcus, who was standing with the patient stillness of someone entirely accustomed to this kind of waiting. Okay, she said. He opened the door for her himself. She got in. He stood on the sidewalk and looked at her through the window for a moment. That same quality of attention, that same focus, and then stepped back. She was 2 blocks away before she realized he hadn't asked for her number. She was 4 blocks away before she realized she hadn't offered it. She was almost home, watching the city slide past the window in its nighttime arrangement of lit windows and empty sidewalks, and the particular loneliness of a large city after midnight, when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The book your mother would have liked most. The one you haven't read yet because you're afraid it will make you miss her. I'd like to give it to you. She stared at the message for a long time. She hadn't mentioned the books. She hadn't told him her mother had been a reader. She had mentioned her mother was an English teacher briefly in the context of something else. She had not said anything about books. She thought about that for the rest of the ride home and most of the night after, lying in her apartment listening to the radiator knock and thinking about a man who danced at a charity gala for the first time in apparently a long time, who ate at restaurants without signs on the door, who talked about architecture with the precision of someone who had genuinely grieved not doing it, and who had somehow paid enough attention to her in the course of one dinner to know something about her she hadn't said out loud. She thought about the way the room had arranged itself around him, the way Harlan had withdrawn without argument, the way the men at the restaurant had nodded, not the nod of social greeting, but the nod of acknowledgement from one authority to another. She thought about the name, Moretti, the half-remembered headline, the colleagues who had lowered their voices. She thought about the $43. She did not text back that night. She texted back at 6:47 in the morning, standing in her kitchen with bad coffee and the electric bill notice on the counter in front of her. What book? His response came in under a minute. Come find out. The next 2 weeks rearranged something in Vivian's understanding of what her life was capable of containing. It wasn't the money, though the money was staggering, not given, but present, the way oxygen is present, invisible and necessary. The restaurant without a sign became a series of restaurants without signs, private clubs accessed through side doors, a rooftop in the financial district that apparently belonged to a building Damien owned and had been converted into a garden that should not have been able to exist 600 feet above street level, but did, stubbornly and beautifully, in defiance of both wind and logic. She met Marcus properly, late 40s, former military, a man of approximately 14 words a day, all of them useful. She met Eli, who handled what Damien called logistics, and who had the eyes of someone who had seen considerable ugliness and organized a reasonable peace with it. She did not meet the other men. There were always other men, present at a distance, professional and unintrusive. And she understood without being told that she was not meant to. She found the book on the third day. It was on the passenger seat of the car when Marcus picked her up for what had been described as lunch, somewhere you haven't been. A first edition. Marilyn Robinson's Gilead, a book she had owned and never opened, sitting on a shelf for 2 years because something about it felt too close to something she wasn't ready to feel. She picked it up and turned it over in her hands and felt the particular sensation of being known by someone who had no logical reason to know her this well this fast. She texted him, "How did you know about this one?" He called instead of texting. His voice on the phone had the same quality as his voice in person, unhurried, direct, with none of the conversational filler most people use to pad silence. "You told me your mother taught Fitzgerald and Steinbeck and said Robinson was the only living writer who came close," he said. "At dinner, you don't remember saying it." She didn't. She must have, though, in the flow of 3 hours of conversation. He'd filed it. Precisely and immediately, the way you file things that matter. "Thank you," she said. She meant it more than the words could carry. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "You haven't read it." "I'm afraid to." "I know," he said. "That's why you should." She read it over 2 days, in pieces, and cried twice. Once on a bench in the public garden in the November cold, once in bed at 11 at night with the lamp on and the rest of the apartment dark. Both times she texted him something fragmented and half-articulate, and both times he responded with the particular restraint of someone who understood that some grief needed acknowledgement and not resolution. "It was worth it," she texted him after the second time. "You were right. You were ready," he sent back. "You just needed someone to tell you." She was starting to understand, in the slow, incremental way that important understandings tend to arrive, that this was what Damien Moretti was. Not the empire, not the fear, not the men at careful distances and the rooms that rearranged themselves around his presence. This was what he was. Someone who paid attention with a thoroughness that most people reserve for things they were professionally obligated to care about, and who used what he knew not to manipulate but to give. It didn't make him less dangerous. She knew that. She had, by the end of the first week, done the research she probably should have done before getting in the car that first night. What she'd found was not simple or comfortable. The Moretti name was attached to things that existed in the specific territory between legal reality and acknowledged understanding, the kind of territory that newspapers described carefully and law enforcement discussed privately, and most people politely avoided looking at too directly. An empire built by his father, inherited under circumstances that remained officially unclear, maintained through a combination of legitimate business interests and other things that were not precisely discussed. She sat with this information for 2 days. She looked at it from different angles. She thought about the man who had described Tadao Ando's architecture with genuine emotion at midnight in a restaurant without a sign, and the man who had found the exact book she needed to grieve her mother, and the man who had looked at her across a ballroom full of people competing for his attention and decided she was the one worth crossing the floor for. She did not resolve the contradiction. She decided she didn't need to yet. She kept seeing him. They went to a private architectural archive in Cambridge one afternoon, a collection housed in the basement of a building affiliated with MIT. accessible apparently only to people with Damien's particular combination of academic connections and financial generosity toward institutional endowments. He walked her through drawings and models with the focused pleasure of someone in their natural element, describing load calculations and site relationships and the way certain architects solved problems of light in northern climates. She listened and asked questions and felt the particular quality of happiness that comes from watching someone be genuinely themselves. "You love this," she said. "Yes." "Do you ever regret—" She stopped. He looked at her. "Go ahead." "Do you ever regret not doing it the other way?" He was quiet for a moment, standing in front of a reproduction of a Scarpa drawing, hands in his pockets, looking at the lines with an expression she was learning to read. "Every day," he said. Then, "But the other obligations were real. I don't regret meeting them." "Your father," she said. Not a question. He looked at her. "My father," he agreed. She didn't ask more. He didn't offer more. But something settled between them in the silence, a shared understanding that some things were adjacent to the conversation without being inside it yet, and that was okay, and they would get there when they got there. He had by this point met her apartment. She'd resisted for 10 days and then invited him for the specific reason that she was tired of his world always being the container for their time together, tired of being the person brought into someone else's environment and shown around it. The apartment was what it was, small, overheated in patches and underheated in others, crammed with books and the particular organized chaos of someone who thought in space and expressed it through arranged objects. She cleaned it without hiding it. She made coffee that was not the caliber of anything he'd been served anywhere in the last 10 days and handed him the mug without apology. He drank it and said nothing about the quality and asked her about the framed architectural sketch on her kitchen wall, a project from grad school that she'd kept because she was still proud of it, and listened to her explain it with the same focused attention he applied to everything. And she thought, this is what it feels like when someone is actually present with you. She'd forgotten that was possible. She wasn't sure she'd ever known it was possible to this degree. She did not think about what it meant. She thought about the electric bill, which was now paid. She'd gotten 2 freelance consultations that week through a contact Margaret had provided. Not Damien, she'd been specific about that with herself. And the novel sitting on her kitchen table, which was 3 chapters from finished, and which she needed to think about whether she was actually writing or just using as something to do with her hands during the empty hours. She was thinking about that, specifically, on the Wednesday evening of the 2nd week, when she arrived at the place Eli had directed her to, a jazz club in the back bay, private, upstairs, and found not Damien but the particular quality of a room that had just experienced something violent. She stopped in the doorway. 2 chairs overturned. A table knocked aside, a glass broken on the floor. 3 men she recognized from Damien's orbit, standing with the particular tight stillness of people trying to contain something. Eli was on the phone at the far end of the room, speaking in a low, rapid voice, and the expression on his face was something Vivian had not seen before in all the time she'd spent around these people. Not controlled worry, actual fear. One of the 3 men moved toward her. "Ms. Mercer, you need to come with me." "Where's Damien?" she said. "Ms. Mercer, where is he?" The man looked at her. He looked at the broken glass on the floor. He looked back at her. "There was an incident," he said. He's alive. He needs you to come with us now. Please." She looked at the room, at the overturned chairs, at the thing on the floor near the broken table that she hadn't let herself identify yet, but that her brain was in the process of insisting she look at. A dark stain, spreading, soaking into the expensive carpet. She looked at the man in front of her. "Take me to him," she said. She did not know it yet. Standing in that room with the stain on the carpet and the controlled fear on the faces of men who were professionally afraid of nothing. But this was the moment. Not the ballroom, not the first dinner, not the book or the archive or the coffee she'd made without apology. This was the moment the story actually started, and she was already inside it with no clear way back out. The car moved through Boston's streets at a speed that was technically legal and felt like flight. Vivian sat in the back between 2 men whose names she didn't know, and whose job, she understood with the clarity that fear produces, was to put their bodies between her and whatever had just happened at that jazz club. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them looked at her. They looked outward. at the side windows, at the mirrors, at the city sliding past in its nighttime arrangement, with the systematic attention of people running continuous threat assessments on everything in their visual field. She focused on breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way her mother had taught her during the panic attacks she'd had at 14, 15, 16, that rough adolescent period when anxiety had been her constant, uninvited companion, and the only management tool available was the most basic physiological one. She hadn't needed it in years. She needed it now. The dark stain on the carpet. She kept seeing it, the specific way it had been spreading, not a spill, not an accident, something organic and pressurized that had come from a body. He's alive. The man had said that. He's alive. She held on to that. Eli was in the front passenger seat on his phone, speaking in the clipped half-sentences of someone relaying tactical information, using terms she didn't know, and a cadence that was military without being military, learned, she thought, from people who had actually been military. He had not looked at her since they'd gotten in the car. She was not sure if this was deliberate. 20 minutes. The car pulled into a parking structure in a part of the city she didn't immediately recognize. Seaport, maybe, or the edge of it, descended 2 levels, and stopped in front of a service elevator that had no business being as large as it was. They went up. 14th floor. A corridor that looked like a hotel corridor, except there were no room numbers on the doors, and the 2 men at the end of it were not hotel security. She registered that without processing it and kept moving because the alternative was stopping and she was not going to stop. The door at the end of the corridor opened before they reached it. Damien was sitting on a low couch in a room that was all dark wood and ambient lighting, and the particular quality of a space designed to be lived in rather than displayed. He had his jacket off. His shirt was white, had been white, with a dark stain spreading from his left side that someone had attempted to address with what appeared to be an improvised compress. A man Vivian didn't recognize was crouched beside him with the focused efficiency of someone with medical training, working on that side with gloved hands, and a kit that was not the kind of kit you bought at a pharmacy. Damien looked up when she came in. "You didn't have to come," he said. His voice was level, slightly compressed, the compression of someone managing pain with the same control they applied to everything else. "No," she agreed. "I didn't." She crossed the room and stood in front of him and looked at the wound and the man working on it, and the careful way Damien was holding himself, upright, deliberate, not letting himself lean into the back of the couch, even though she could see, in the set of his jaw and the particular tightness around his eyes, that it would have been a significant relief to do so. "How bad?" she said. "Manageable." "That's not what I asked." He looked at her. Something shifted in his face. That flatness she'd learned to read, the thing behind it. "Through and through," he said. "Left side. Nothing critical." "Through and through means a bullet." "Yes," she breathed. "In through the nose." "Okay," she said. She pulled a chair from against the wall and sat down in front of him and did not look away from his face, and did not say any of the things she was thinking because the things she was thinking were large and various, and none of them were useful in this specific moment. What was useful in this specific moment was being present, being still. Not performing the kind of distress that would make him spend energy managing her when his energy was visibly limited. The man with the medical kit, she would learn his name was Torres, ex-Army medic, one of 4 people in Boston. Damien trusted with this category of problem, finished his work in silence, and withdrew to a respectful distance. Eli came in from somewhere and exchanged a look with Damien that contained considerable information, and none of it was good. "Tell me," Damien said. "Cavallo's people," Eli said. "Or people working for Cavallo. We're still—" "How many?" "4 in the club. We handled it. 2 got out." A pause. "They weren't trying to send a message. They were trying to finish it." The temperature in the room changed, not literally. Something in the quality of the attention, all the men in the room, Damien at the center of it, the stillness that preceded significant decisions. "The 2 that got out," Damien said. "We're on it. Tonight." "Yes." Damien was quiet for a moment. He looked down at his side, at Torres's work, the bandaging, the controlled reality of having been shot, with the expression of a man doing a specific kind of accounting. Then he looked at Vivian, I need a few minutes, he said. I'm not going anywhere, she said. Something crossed his face. It was brief and she almost missed it. She didn't miss it. Eli will take you to the other room. There's Damien. She said his name the way he said hers sometimes, with a specificity that stopped things. I'm not going to the other room. Handle what you need to handle. I'll be right here. The men in the room were looking at her. She could feel it. The particular quality of attention from people who were recalibrating something. Damien looked at her for another second, then looked at Eli. Give us the room, he said. They cleared out with the efficiency of people who had practiced clearing out. Torres last, pausing at the door. 20 minutes, and I need to check that again, he said to Damien. And then they were alone. The room was very quiet. Somewhere far below, the city continued its business. Through the window, she could see the harbor. Dark water, lights from East Boston, a plane descending toward Logan with its landing lights cutting the sky. You should be angry, Damien said. I am angry, she said. I'm going to be angry later. Right now I need to know what happened. I told you what happened. You told me you were shot. I need to know why. I need to know what cavallo means and who sent 4 men to kill you and whether... She stopped, reorganized. Whether I'm in danger. He looked at her directly. Yes, he said. Yes, I'm in danger, or yes, that's what you need to tell me. Both. She absorbed that. Outside, the plane disappeared below the horizon of the harbor. The radiator in the corner ticked. Tell me, she said. It's complicated. Don't. The word came out harder than she'd intended. She didn't walk it back. Don't tell me it's complicated. You asked me to dinner 2 weeks ago, and I got in a car with strangers tonight because they said you were hurt, and I needed to know you were alive. You don't get to say it's complicated to me right now. He was quiet. His left hand was pressed flat against his thigh in the way she'd come to recognize as his version of a tell, the thing his body did when he was deciding something, the pressure of a decision working its way through him toward a resolution. Marco Cavallo runs territory out of Providence, he said. We've had an arrangement for 8 years, civil, profitable for both sides. 6 months ago, his son came into the business and started making different calculations. He paused. The son thinks Boston should be his. And you? I'm the reason it isn't. She looked at him, at the bandaging, at the white shirt with its dark stain, at the man beneath the controlled surface, tired. She could see that now, genuinely tired in a way the control had been doing a good job of concealing, sitting upright by will alone because he wasn't going to let himself be seen any other way. How long has this been building? She said. 3 months. You knew 3 months ago that someone was coming for you. I knew it was a possibility. And 2 weeks ago, you walked across a ballroom and introduced yourself to a woman and started... She stopped. Started again. Did you think about what that meant? What you were bringing toward someone when you decided, yes? No hesitation. I thought about it. And I made a selfish decision, he said, and I would make it again. She stood up, not because she needed to leave, but because she needed to move. The particular restlessness of someone whose body is processing something that their mind hasn't caught up to yet. She walked to the window and stood with her arms crossed and looked at the harbor. I'm not a prop, she said to the glass. I'm not something you pick up because it makes you feel like a different version of yourself. If that's what this is, it's not. Then what is it? The silence behind her stretched. She heard him shift on the couch, carefully, accommodating the wound. And then his voice came from closer than it had been, and she realized he'd stood up, which was either brave or stupid, or both. I don't know yet, he said. I know it's real. I know it's the only thing in the last 3 months that's felt like something worth... He stopped. She turned around. He was standing 4 feet from her, one hand braced on the back of the couch, his face doing the thing it did when he wasn't managing the expression anymore. Open, she thought. He looked open in a way she hadn't seen before, like something structural had been removed. I'm not built for this kind of conversation, he said. I know, she said. Do it anyway. He looked at her. You scare me, he said. That's the honest version. You're the first person I've met in a long time who doesn't want something I have, and I don't know what to do with that. I don't have a framework for it. A pause. I've been running on obligation and threat calculation for so long that I forgot what it felt like to want something for its own sake. Another pause. Shorter. You're the thing I want for its own sake. The room was very quiet. She looked at him, at the wound, the exhaustion, the open quality of his face that cost him something to show her, and felt the full complicated weight of what she was standing in the middle of. Not love, not yet. She was too honest with herself for that word at 2 weeks. But something load-bearing, something that had been building with the structural integrity of a well-designed thing, carefully and without shortcuts, and that would matter regardless of what she decided to do about it. You need to sit down, she said. Torres said 20 minutes. Something released in his face. Not relief exactly, something more specific. Yes, he said. Sit down, Damien. He sat. The penthouse was on the 42nd floor of a building in the Back Bay, and it was the most secure residential space Vivian had ever stood in, which was a category she'd never expected to have an opinion about. She was not a prisoner. Damien had been explicit about this, had used that specific word in the conversation at 3 a.m. on the couch after Torres had checked the wound a second time, and the immediate crisis had settled into the grinding low-level tension of an ongoing one. You're not a prisoner. The door isn't locked. Marcus will take you anywhere you want to go, anytime you want to go. He'd looked at her when he said it with the same directness he applied to everything, giving her the information and the choice and not doing anything to shade either one. She'd stayed. Not from fear, though she'd examined that possibility honestly and found it wasn't the primary driver. From the particular stubbornness of someone who had decided on a position and intended to hold it. She had said she wasn't going anywhere, and she had meant it, and she was a person who meant the things she said. That had been 4 days ago. The penthouse was extraordinary. It occupied 2 floors connected by a staircase that curved upward with the specific elegance of something designed rather than merely built. Floor-to-ceiling windows on the east side caught the morning light over the harbor. There were books, real books, accumulated rather than decorated, organized in ways that told her things about how Damien's mind worked. Architecture, history, a section of literature that was heavier on American realism than she'd expected. 3 books on urban planning with spines bent and pages marked in a way that suggested genuine use rather than display. She found the architectural drawings on the 3rd day. They were in a room she'd initially taken for a study. Large desk, good lamp, the specific quality of a room where someone actually worked. But rolled and stacked in one corner and spread on the drafting table she'd initially registered as decorative, but which was not decorative at all, were drawings. Detailed, careful, developed with the technical precision of serious architectural work. Site plans, elevations, interior sections, a multi-story structure with community spaces on the ground floor. She could read the program from the drawings, recognize the language, and residential units above. The site notation put it in Roxbury. She was standing over the drafting table, following the logic of the design, when the door opened. Damien stopped when he saw her. She looked up. He was dressed but not suited. Dark trousers, a simple dark shirt with the first button open, moving more carefully than usual because the wound was still 4 days old, and Torres had been specific about what careful meant. He looked at the drawings on the table, and then at her, and something complicated moved across his face. Community center, she said. Mixed use. These are residential units on 3 and 4. She looked back at the drawings. The structural system is exposed concrete. That's expensive. Intentionally. Why intentionally? Because it's honest, he said. He came into the room, carefully, but without the performance of carefulness, just the adjusted economy of someone managing a real limitation, and stood beside the table and looked at the drawings with her. The neighborhood has been given a lot of things designed to look cheap. I wanted to design something that would look in 50 years like it was always supposed to be there. You designed this yourself. Over the last 2 years. She looked at the elevations, at the way the building engaged the street, setback, materials, the rhythm of windows. It was good. Not student work, not the design equivalent of a wealthy man's hobby. Genuinely good. Thought through, spatially intelligent, humanly scaled in the way that only came from actually caring about the people who would use the space. Who's building it? She said. Nobody yet. She looked at him. I haven't figured out how to do it without, he said. without it being complicated, without it being attached to your name. Yes, she understood that. She stood with it for a moment, following the implication, the particular difficulty of wanting to do something good when your name made goodness complicated, when every genuine gesture would be read through the lens of everything else your name meant. It's good work, she said. I want you to know that. Regardless of everything else, this is good. He looked at the drawings and said nothing. She looked at his face and saw, in the stillness of it, the particular pain of someone for whom good work had been an unreachable thing for a long time. She thought about that for the rest of the day. And she thought about Marco Cavallo and the two men who had gotten out and what were on it tonight had meant, and whether those men were still alive and whether she was someone who needed to know the answer to that question, or someone who had decided to understand certain things by not asking. She hadn't decided yet. She was in the kitchen, large, equipped with the seriousness of someone who actually cooked, making coffee at 7 in the morning when she heard voices at the front of the penthouse, raised in the specific frequency of an argument being conducted at a volume intended to be controlled and failing. She put down the coffee and listened. Eli's voice first, measured but tight. Not the timing for this. You know what Torres said. And then a voice she didn't recognize, male, older, with an accent that placed him somewhere in the mid-Atlantic corridor. The timing is what it is. Where is he? He's resting. You can come back. I don't come back, Eli. He knows that. A pause. Then Damien's voice, from somewhere nearer than she'd expected. Let him in. She moved to the doorway of the kitchen without making a decision to do so, the instinctive positioning of someone who wanted to see without being seen. Through the partially open door, she could see the entryway. Eli, standing with the quality of someone holding a position under pressure, and the man who had come in. 60s, compact, a face that had been weathered by something more than years, dressed in the kind of careful nondescript that meant the opposite of what it appeared. And Damien, who had come from the study and was standing in the corridor in the low morning light, barefoot, left hand pressed against his side in that tell she'd learned, looking at the older man with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not fear, not anger. Something more specific and more difficult. The expression of someone confronting an obligation they cannot refuse regardless of the cost. Vincent, Damien said. You look like hell, the man said. He looked past Damien, directly at the kitchen doorway, directly at Vivian. He could see her. She hadn't considered the angle. He'd been able to see her the entire time. So, he said. His eyes moved back to Damien. This is the complication. She's not a complication, Damien said. His voice was flat and absolutely certain in the way that meant what it said and would not be moved. The man called Vincent looked at her again. His expression was not hostile. It was something more uncomfortable than hostile. Analytical, the way you look at a variable you've been asked to account for and haven't yet figured out how to price. Cavallo sent 4 men, he said, still looking at Vivian. He'll send more. And now there is a face he can use. He looked back at Damien. A face he will use. You understand what that means? The air in the corridor changed. Vivian understood, with the cold mechanical clarity of someone who had just watched a door close behind her, exactly what it meant. It meant she was no longer adjacent to the danger. She was inside it. And the man she had chosen to stay beside was standing between her and the door, wounded and certain, and looking at her with the specific quality of a person who knew the cost of what they'd done and intended to pay it, and was not sure yet whether the person beside them was willing to do the same. Vincent Caruso did not sit down. This was, Vivian would later understand, a statement. The man had been in the penthouse for 11 minutes and had not accepted the chair Eli had offered, had not accepted coffee, had not done any of the things that people did when they entered a space and intended to stay in it comfortably. He stood in the center of the living room with his hands loose at his sides and his eyes moving between Damien and Vivian with the systematic attention of someone conducting an assessment they had already largely completed. Damien had not asked her to leave. She had not offered to. They were past that, she thought. Whatever the threshold was between the version of this where she stood in other rooms while important things happened and the version where she stood in this one, they had crossed it somewhere in the last 4 days, and neither of them had made a ceremony of it, and that was exactly right. Sit down, Vincent, Damien said. I'll stand. It's not a suggestion, a beat. Vincent looked at him with the expression of a man recalibrating the distance between where he stood and where the line was. He sat. Damien sat across from him. Vivian stayed near the window, present, visible, not performing neutrality. The harbor behind her was gray in the morning light, low clouds pressing down on the water. "How bad?" Damien said. "Worse than you know." Vincent's eyes moved briefly to Vivian. Back to Damien. "How much does she—" "Everything I decide to tell her. That's a problem." "That's my problem." "How bad, Vincent?" Vincent looked at his hands for a moment, the specific pause of someone ordering information they find genuinely unpleasant. "Cavallo didn't move alone," he said. "The 4 men at the club. That's not a Providence operation. Providence doesn't have that kind of reach into Boston, not without help. Somebody opened a door for them." The room went quiet in a specific way. Vivian watched Damien's face, watched the thing that moved through it. Not surprise, which told her something, but the cold particular settling of a man whose suspicion had just been confirmed, his left hand pressed flat against his thigh. "Who?" he said. "We don't have a name yet." "Best guess." "Someone inside," Vincent said. "Close enough to know your schedule, close enough to know the club." "How many people knew about the club that night?" "Eli made the reservation. Torres knew because Torres always knows. Marcus knew because Marcus drove." A pause. "And whoever Eli told." Eli was standing near the door. He had been standing near the door since Vincent arrived, in the specific position of someone who understood they were being discussed and was choosing stillness as their response. Vivian looked at him. His face was flat, professionally flat, the kind of flat that took practice and meant nothing by itself, but that felt, in this specific moment, in this specific context, like something that required more attention. Damien did not look at Eli. This was the thing that Vivian noticed. He did not look at him. "I need the room," Damien said. "Vivian, give me 10 minutes." It was the first time he had asked her to leave. She read it correctly. Not dismissal, not protection, not the reflex of a powerful man removing inconvenient witnesses. A specific ask, for a specific reason, from someone who had been honest with her about the difference. She went to the study. She did not close the door entirely. She stood at the drafting table with her hands on the drawings, the Roxbury project, the exposed concrete, and the honest structural system, and listened to the quality of the silence from the other room. She could not hear words. She could hear register and rhythm, and what she heard was the specific rhythm of men saying things they had prepared to say, and men receiving those things, and the silence that fell after, which was not the silence of resolution. 8 minutes. Then the front door. Then Damien in the doorway of the study. He looked at her. She looked at him. His face was doing the thing where it was flat on the surface and very loud underneath. "It's Eli," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "We don't know that." "You know that." He looked at the drawings on the table. "I've known Eli for 11 years, he said. "He's been with me since before my father—" He stopped. 11 years. "I know. I need proof before—" "I know." She came around the table and stood in front of him, close. "What are you going to do?" "Find the proof." "How long will that take?" "As long as it takes. And in the meantime, Cavallo knows where you are." "Cavallo knows where I always am. That's not new." "It's new that he's acting on it," she said. "It's new that 4 men came to a club and one of them nearly—" She stopped, reorganized. "What does Vincent say?" "Vincent says I should move." A pause. "And that you should go." She looked at him. "Not because you're a liability," he said, quickly, the specificity of someone correcting a misreading before it could take root. "Because you didn't sign up for this. You can still—" "Don't," she said. "Vivian, don't offer me the exit again." She said it quietly, without anger, which she thought made it land harder than anger would have. "I know it's there. You've made sure I know it's there. I don't want it. What I want is for you to stop making decisions about what I can handle and start talking to me like someone who's actually in this with you." He looked at her for a long moment. "Okay," he said. "Okay. Then here's the truth," he said. "If it's Eli, then Cavallo has had access to my schedule, my locations, my security rotations, for however long Eli has been talking to him. which means everything I think I know about my own exposure is wrong, which means I am significantly more vulnerable than I believed 4 days ago, and so are you, and the people around me. She held the weight of that. Then we move, she said. We, she said. Where does Vincent want you to go? Métier. The safe house was in Charlestown, a brownstone on a residential street that looked exactly like every other brownstone on the street, which was the point. Inside it was spare and functional, the way spaces look when they have been designed for use rather than habitation. Clean lines, good locks, a kitchen stocked with the basics and nothing else. Windows positioned to allow sight lines in multiple directions. Marcus drove them. Torres came separately. Vincent had gone ahead and was already inside when they arrived, standing in the kitchen with a coffee he hadn't touched, looking at his phone with the expression of someone receiving bad news in increments. Vivian carried one bag. She had gone back to her apartment, Marcus driving, 2 other men in a second car, the specific indignity of needing an escort to collect her own belongings from her own home, and stood in the space she'd lived in for 3 years, and felt the strange dissociation of seeing it as a place she was leaving rather than a place she lived. She'd taken clothes, the Robinson novel, her laptop, the framed sketch from the kitchen wall. She'd looked around at the rest of it, the books, the small, carefully arranged life she'd built inside the emergency mode of the last 6 months, and felt the first genuine grief of what she was choosing. She did not let herself stand there long. Back at the safe house, she set the framed sketch on the windowsill of the room she'd been given and looked at it for a moment, and then went to find Damien. He was in the room Vincent was using as a command space, a table, laptops, a phone setup that Vivian didn't recognize, and he was on a call, standing with his back to the door, speaking in a low, controlled voice. She didn't interrupt. She stood in the corridor and waited, and when he came out, she saw in his face that something had changed. "What?" she said. "Eli's gone," he said. She absorbed that. "He cleared out an hour ago," Damien said. "Apartment, car, everything. Which means he knew we were moving. Which means it is him." "Yes." She looked at him. At the controlled surface, the loudness underneath. 11 years. She didn't say it because he knew it better than she did, and saying it only made it heavier. "Does Cavallo know about this location?" she said. "Not yet. Vincent secured it outside normal channels." "How long do we have?" "Long enough," he said. "Maybe." "Dann?" "Ja." The maybe turned into 26 hours of a specific kind of waiting that Vivian had not previously experienced. Not the anxious, formless waiting of personal uncertainty, but the tactical waiting of people in a secured position tracking threats in real time. Vincent's people fed information through the laptop setup. Damien processed it with the systematic attention of someone running continuous calculations, mapping what he knew against what he was learning, adjusting. She stayed close, not in the room always. She gave him space when the conversations required it, stayed in the kitchen or the small living area, and read the Robinson novel and drank the indifferent coffee and thought about the architectural drawings and the Roxbury project and what it meant that the most genuine thing she'd learned about this man was the thing he'd never gotten to do. She thought about her mother, who had spent her life giving students language for the world, and had died before she'd seen whether any of it had taken. She thought about the particular stubbornness of people who built towards something even when the conditions were hostile. She was thinking about this on the second morning when the door of the safe house opened. Not Marcus, not Torres, not any of the people who were supposed to be using that door. She was in the kitchen and she heard it and was on her feet before she'd processed the hearing, some animal layer of her nervous system moving faster than thought. She pressed back against the counter and heard, from the front of the house, the specific sounds of a confrontation that was not going to be resolved with words. 3 seconds. She counted them because counting was the thing her mind did when it needed to not fly apart. Then Damien's voice. "Vivian, don't move." She didn't move. More sounds. A crash. Something overturning. Something heavy. Voices she didn't recognize. Then silence, which was in some ways worse than the sounds. Then Damien in the kitchen doorway, and 2 men behind him with the particular professional bearing of people who had not come to talk. And one of them was holding something against Damien's left side. Against the wound, she registered, exactly against the wound. with the calculated cruelty of someone who knew exactly what they were applying pressure to. The man on the left looked at her. "Miss Mercer," he said. He had a flat accent and the specific quality of someone who had rehearsed this. "Mr. Cavallo would like to speak with you." "Cavallo's not here," she said. Her voice was steady. She was amazed by this. "No," the man agreed. "But we are." She looked at Damien. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not the flatness, not the control, not the quality of a man managing his own reactions. Something raw and direct and entirely focused on her. His jaw was tight. The man beside him adjusted his hand against his side, and she saw the compression of pain move through Damien's face and saw him refuse to show it further. "It's okay," she said. To him. She meant it the way you mean something when you are not sure it's true but intend to make it true by saying it. "Don't," he started. "It's okay," she said again. She looked at the man who had spoken. "What does he want?" "Information," the man said, "about Moretti's business, his locations, his arrangements." He paused. "The things a woman who has been living in his space for a week would have seen and heard." "I don't know his business. Mr. Cavallo believes otherwise. Mr. Cavallo is wrong." The man looked at her with the patient expression of someone who had done this before and found patience more effective than hurry. "Ms. Mercer, you have two options. You come with us and have a conversation, or—" He moved his hand, or the man with his hand against Damien's side moved his, and Damien made a sound that was brief and controlled and that cost him something to control. She looked at Damien. He was looking at her. She could read his face now, had learned it over the course of 2 weeks and 4 days, and a shooting and a betrayal, and a morning over architectural drawings. She could read what he was trying to tell her. Don't trade yourself for me. Don't." She looked at the man. "I'll come," she said. "Vivian," Damien's voice was flat and absolute. "Don't." "Let him go," she said to the man. "I'll come with you. Let him go, and I'll come." The man looked at her for a moment, then nodded at his companion. Damien was released, stepped forward immediately, toward her, and one of the men moved between them with the efficiency of someone who had anticipated this. "Don't make this harder," the man said, to Damien. "She's agreed. It's a conversation, not a— If anything happens to her," Damien said, and his voice had a quality she had not heard in it before. Not the control, not the management, something underneath all of that, something older and colder and entirely without the civilized surface. "There is no version of this that ends well for anyone working for Cavallo. You know who I am. You know what that means." The man looked at him. "Then it won't come to that," he said, "as long as she cooperates." She looked at Damien one more time. He was looking at her with that raw, specific thing, the thing she didn't have a word for yet, the thing that had been building for 2 weeks and had no clean category. His left hand was at his side, pressed flat, not against the wound but against his thigh. That decision working its way through him toward a resolution he couldn't reach. "I'll be fine," she said. She did not know if she meant it. She said it with the same conviction she'd applied to "it's okay," because conviction was the only tool she had right now, and she intended to use every inch of it. They put her in a car, blacked out windows. She focused on her breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth, counting the turns, left, right, long straightaway, the slight incline of a bridge, left, cataloging the route with the focused attention of someone who understood that information was the only currency she currently possessed. The car stopped. A building. She could see it through the brief gap between the car door and wherever they were taking her. Industrial, waterfront, the specific quality of a space that had been something else and was now being used for a purpose its architecture hadn't intended. Inside. A room, a table, a chair, and a man she didn't know seated across from where they put her, who looked at her with the flat assessment of someone who had already decided something and was now simply collecting the final piece of evidence. "Miss Mercer," he said, "I appreciate you coming." "I didn't have a lot of choice," she said. "No," he agreed. "But you could have made it harder. You didn't. That tells me something about you." "What does it tell you?" "That you're practical," he said. "Good. I prefer practical." He folded his hands on the table. My name is Daniel Cavallo. I believe you've heard of my father. She looked at him. Young, younger than she'd expected, late 30s maybe, with a face that had the particular handsomeness of a man who had learned to use it and a quality behind it that was calculating in a way that had nothing warm at its center. I've heard the name, she said. Then you understand the context. He looked at her with the patient directness of someone who had prepared this conversation and intended to move through it efficiently. I don't want Damien Moretti dead, he said. Despite what you may have been told, the men at the club, that was a message. It got out of hand. Someone almost died. Yes, he said. Regrettable. The word was flat, which told her everything about how regrettable he actually found it. What I want is a conversation, a negotiation. Damien has something I want, and I have something he wants, and there is a version of this that doesn't require anyone else to get hurt. He paused. I need him to hear that. I need someone he trusts to carry it to him. She looked at him. You want me to be a messenger, she said. I want you to be a bridge, he said. There's a difference. What's the difference? A messenger carries words. A bridge stays standing. He looked at her steadily. I need Damien Moretti at a table, talking, not defending, not attacking, talking. And I believe you're the only person he's currently willing to... He stopped. Something moved across his face. The only person he's listening to. She absorbed this, turned it over, looked at it from the angle she'd been learning to look at things in, not the presented surface, but the structure underneath, the load-bearing logic. He wasn't wrong about that. She didn't like that he wasn't wrong about it. What do you have that he wants? She said. Cavallo looked at her. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed a photograph on the table between them. She looked at it. It was a man. Older, mid-60s, heavy-built, photographed from a distance in the way surveillance photographs were taken, standing outside what appeared to be a building in a warm climate, looking away from the camera. She didn't recognize him. Who is this? She said. Someone Damien has been looking for, Cavallo said, for 6 years. She looked at the photograph again, at the man's profile, the set of his shoulders, the specific quality of someone who had arranged to be difficult to find and had, until recently, she looked at the photograph for a long time. The man's profile, the set of his shoulders, the specific quality of someone photographed from a distance by someone they didn't know was watching. Warm climate. The light had that flat tropical weight, somewhere Mediterranean or further south. The building behind him was nondescript, the kind of architecture that existed to be forgotten. Who is he? She said again. Cavallo looked at her with the patience of someone who had prepared this reveal and intended to let it land at its own pace. His name doesn't matter to you, he said. What matters to you is what he means to Damien. He tapped the edge of the photograph once, lightly. This man disappeared 6 years ago, officially. There were circumstances, but a fire, a boat, the kind of ending that gets recorded and closed. He paused. He didn't die. She looked at him. Damien's father, she said. The word landed in the room with a weight she felt physically, something pressing against her sternum. She looked at the photograph again, the profile, the heavy build, the deliberate distance from the camera that was not accidental distance, she understood now, but the practiced distance of someone who had learned to live unseen. He's been alive this entire time, she said. 6 years, Cavallo confirmed. And you have him. I know where he is. A careful distinction. Which is not the same thing, but it is something Damien has been unable to learn in 6 years of looking. He looked at her steadily. I am prepared to give him that location, in exchange for a conversation, a real one, at a table, without weapons or conditions, about the future of this city and who runs what parts of it. He paused. That is my offer. I need you to carry it. She sat with it, turned it over, examined it the way she examined structural problems, looking for the load-bearing logic, the place where the weight actually rested. Why me? She said. You could have sent this through anyone. You could have called. Damien doesn't take my calls, Cavallo said, and anyone I send he reads as a threat. He looked at her with the flat assessment that had been his register since she'd sat down. You are not a threat. You are the one person in his current world who is there because she chose to be, not because she's paid to be. He knows the difference, so do I. She thought about Damien's face when the man had pressed against his wound, that raw, specific thing. She thought about 11 years and a man named Eli who had cleared out his apartment. She thought about architectural drawings on a drafting table and a building in Roxbury that hadn't been built yet. If I take this to him, she said, and he agrees, what happens to me? Nothing happens to you, Cavallo said. You were never the point. That's not an answer. He looked at her. Something shifted in his face. The first thing that wasn't calculation. You walk away, he said. From all of it. From him, from this, from whatever you've gotten yourself into in the last 2 weeks. You go back to your life. And if I don't want to walk away? He was quiet for a moment. Then that's between you and him, he said. I'm not in the business of separating people. He paused, despite what Damien may have told you about my methods. She looked at the photograph one more time, at the man who had faked his death and left his son to inherit an empire, and 6 years of searching. I'll carry it, she said. Well, they drove her back in the same blacked-out car, same turns in reverse. Right, left, left. The bridge, the long straightaway. She counted them again on the way back and thought about Damien's face and the photograph in her jacket pocket and what she was carrying back into the safe house and what it was going to do when it arrived. The car stopped 2 blocks from the brownstone. The man with the flat accent opened her door and said nothing, and she got out and walked the 2 blocks in the November cold, with her hands in her pockets and the photograph against her ribs and her breath making small white clouds in the air. The safe house door opened before she reached it. Damien. He had been watching from the window. She could tell from the specific quality of his stillness, the way he was positioned, the fact that he had the door open before she'd knocked. He looked at her with the full focused weight of someone who had spent however many hours in the particular hell of waiting and was now engaged in a rapid assessment of damage. Are you hurt? He said. No. He stepped back and let her in and closed the door, and she heard the locks engage, multiple, sequential. And then he turned and looked at her, and whatever control he'd been running on since the men left the safe house was still operating, but operating at a visible cost. What did he want? He said. A conversation, she said, with you, at a table. He looked at her. Something shifted in his face. Cavallo. His son. Daniel. Daniel! The name came out flat. He sent men to my club. He had someone inside my operation for... He stopped. Reorganized the way she'd seen him do it. The breath, the pressure of the flat hand against his thigh. And now he wants a conversation. He says the club was a message that got out of hand. Someone almost died. I know, I said that. What did he say? That he found it regrettable? She said. She didn't soften it. He wouldn't want it softened. And that there's a version of this that doesn't require anyone else to get hurt. He wants to negotiate territory. He says you have something he wants, and he has something you... She stopped. He was watching her, reading the pause with the precision he applied to everything. What does he have? Damien said. His voice had changed, flattened in a different way. Not the management of emotion, but the specific flatness of someone who had arrived at the edge of something and was standing very still. She reached into her jacket pocket and placed the photograph on the table between them. He looked at it. She watched his face. What happened there was not what she'd expected, which was the flatness breaking, some visible grief or shock emerging. What happened was the opposite, a stillness so complete it was almost frightening, the stillness of a man in whom something enormous had just occurred and who was containing it through the application of pure will. His hands were on the table. She watched his right hand press down flat, then his left, then both hands together, pressed against the surface as though he needed the contact. Where? He said. His voice was barely a voice, the word barely a word. He knows the location, she said. He said he'll give it to you at the table. The meeting, the negotiation, he gives you that in exchange. Damien looked at the photograph for a long time, at the profile of the man who had disappeared 6 years ago and left his son to carry everything he'd built and to search for a ghost that was apparently walking around in a warm climate somewhere, alive and deliberately unfindable. "He's been alive," Damien said. "Not to her, to the photograph, to something private." "Yes." 6 years. "Yes." He picked up the photograph, held it, set it down again. The movements were careful, the specific carefulness of someone managing the relationship between their hands and a fragile thing. She did not speak. This was not the moment for speaking. He sat with it for a long time, long enough that Marcus appeared in the doorway from somewhere and read the room and withdrew without a word. Long enough that the November light through the window shifted from morning to something approaching noon. Then he looked at her. "You carried this back to me," he said. "Yes." "He could have kept you, used you for longer." "I know." "Why didn't he?" "He said I was never the point." She paused. "I think he's telling the truth about wanting to negotiate. I think the club was genuinely miscalculated. I think he's 20 years younger than his father and running on ambition and hasn't learned yet that the difference between what you want and what you can take is a more complicated calculation than it looks." She paused again. "I think he's scared of you and trying to operate from a position of leverage before that fear makes him do something worse than the club." Damien looked at her. "You figured all that out in one conversation." "I've been reading spaces my whole life," she said. "People aren't that different from buildings. The structure tells you what it can hold." Something moved across his face that was not quite a smile, but was in the same territory. Then it was gone, replaced by something more serious. "I need to think," he said. "I know. And I need to tell you something first." She waited. He looked at his hands, at the photograph, back at her. "My father didn't disappear," he said. "He ran. There was a situation with the family, with the operation. Things had been done that couldn't be undone, and the people he'd done them to were coming to collect. He chose to vanish rather than face it." He paused. "He left me the empire and the enemies and the debt and a body they pulled from the harbor that was not his body and that I was told to confirm is his." "You confirmed it," she said. "I was 29, he said, "and I had just inherited a war I didn't start and people depending on me to hold a line my father had drawn and then abandoned." A pause. "I confirmed it. I buried him. I ran the operation, and I found the enemies, and I settled the debts, and I spent 6 years believing that he was either actually dead or so thoroughly hidden that finding him was an impossibility. And now Cavallo's son has him." "Cavallo's son has where he is," Damien said, "which is different, which means my father made contact at some point, or someone who knew him talked, or—" He stopped. "It means he's been reachable this entire time. It means he chose not to be reached." She held the weight of that with him. "What do you want to do?" she said. He looked at the photograph one more time. "I want to go to the meeting," he said. "I want to look Daniel Cavallo in the face and make whatever arrangement ends this without more bloodshed, and take the location and find my father and ask him—" He stopped. "Ask him why." "Okay," she said. "It's not safe," he said. "The meeting. It's never safe. It's a room with a man who sent shooters to a jazz club, and I'll be walking in with the wound they gave me and whatever trust I can rebuild in the next—" "I know," she said. "When do you want to do it?" He looked at her. "You're not coming." "I carried the message," she said. "I'm the bridge," he said. "Bridges don't—" "You're not coming, Vivian." The certainty in his voice was not the certainty of a man giving an order. It was the certainty of a man who had decided something about the limits of what he was willing to risk, and had arrived at that decision through a calculation that was not strategic, but something older. She looked at him. She thought about arguing. She decided she would argue later, and right now she would let him have this one. "Okay," she said. The meeting was arranged for the following night. Vincent handled the location, neutral ground, a property in East Boston that belonged to a third party with no affiliation to either side, a commercial kitchen in a restaurant that had been closed for 2 years, empty and cold and lit by work lights that threw everything in high contrast, the kind of space that was deliberately stripped of comfort, which was itself a statement about the nature of the conversation. Damien wore a dark suit. He moved carefully. The wound was 9 days old now, and Torres had said healing, but not healed with the specific emphasis of a man whose professional advice was being noted and overridden. He checked the inside of his jacket twice. He checked his phone. He looked at the architectural drawings on the drafting table of the safe house they were leaving. Had looked at them every day, Vivian had noticed, the way you look at something you are reminding yourself exists. And then he looked at her. "I'll be back in 2 hours," he said. "I know," she said. He started toward the door. "Damien." He turned. She crossed the room and stopped in front of him and looked at him directly. At the face she had learned over 2 weeks and 4 days, and a shooting, and a betrayal, and a photograph, and a conversation at 2 in the morning on a couch in a penthouse while Torres checked a wound. She put her hand against his jaw, which was something she had not done before, a physical directness she had been calibrating toward without taking. She felt the muscle there, tight, and the warmth of his skin, and the specific quality of a face that had just gone still in a way that meant something. "Come back," she said. He looked at her. That raw, specific thing, the word she still didn't have for it, the thing that had been building since a ballroom in November, and a dance and a name she'd heard peripherally, and a decision she'd made in the back of a car. "Yes," he said. He left. She stood at the window and watched the car until it turned the corner and was gone. And then she stood at the window for another minute, looking at the empty street and thinking about structural systems and load-bearing walls, and the specific engineering problem of building something that could hold weight under conditions it was never designed for. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Unknown number. She answered because the last time she'd answered an unknown number at this particular moment in her life, it had been Damien, and the message had been about a book, and that had changed everything. This was not Damien. "Ms. Mercer." The voice was older, not Cavallo's son, not anyone she recognized. Male, unhurried, with an accent she couldn't immediately place. "My name is not important. What is important is that you understand something before tonight's meeting concludes." She stood very still. "The photograph my son showed you," the voice said. Her fingers tightened on the phone. "The man in that photograph," the voice continued, "is not where Daniel told you he is. Daniel doesn't know where I am. He has a photograph. He has a story. He does not have a location." A pause. "He manufactured leverage from what he had, which is, I will admit, something he learned from me." She pressed her back against the wall and focused on breathing. "What do you want?" she said. "I want to speak to my son," the voice said. "Not through intermediaries, not through negotiation. I want to speak to Damien, and I want to do it before whatever happens tonight makes it impossible." A pause. "I have been watching from a distance for 6 years. I know what he built. I know what it cost him. I know what I left him." Another pause, shorter, with something underneath it that was not calculation. "I would like the opportunity to tell him I know." She thought about Damien's hands on the table, pressing flat. The photograph. 6 years. The specific flatness of containing something enormous. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because you are the bridge," the voice said. "His son told you that, and my son was right, which is something I find I don't say often enough." The faint suggestion of something, not warmth, but the memory of warmth. And because the meeting tonight is not what Daniel told you it was. He wants Damien at a table, but he also has Eli. The cold came so fast she felt it in her hands. "Eli," she said. "Eli has been talking to my son for 8 months, the voice said. He has given Daniel everything, and Daniel's intention tonight is not negotiation." The voice was absolutely level. "It is to finish what the men at the jazz club started, with Damien sitting at a table expecting a conversation and finding something else entirely." She was already moving toward the door. "How do I reach you?" she said. "You don't," the voice said. "You reach my son. You stop that meeting. And then when the dust has settled and Damien is still alive and you are both somewhere you can breathe, you tell him his father is sorry." A pause. "He won't believe it. But tell him anyway." The line went dead. She was in the corridor pulling on her jacket when Torres appeared from the kitchen and looked at her with the assessment of someone who read threat levels instinctively. "I need a car," she said. "Right now." "What happened?" "The meeting is a trap." She was already at the door. "Torres, right now. I need a car and I need to get to East Boston in the next—" She looked at her phone, at the timestamp of when Damien had left, calculated the drive time, the setup time, the window before. "We have 20 minutes. Torres looked at her for exactly 1 second. Then he grabbed his keys. The car was moving before her door was fully closed, Torres driving with the specific controlled aggression of someone who had driven in worse conditions for higher stakes and knew how to make a car do what was needed without attracting attention. She had her phone out and was trying Damien's number. Once, twice, the particular helpless frustration of a phone ringing in a room where someone couldn't answer or had turned it off or had already walked into something that had closed around him. Third try. Voicemail. She held the phone and thought about what she knew. East Boston, commercial kitchen, a third-party property. She didn't have the address. She hadn't been given the address because she hadn't been going. And she looked at Torres and said, "Do you know where they went?" "Vincent's location," Torres said. "Yeah, I know it." "How far?" 12 minutes. "We have 10. He looked at the road ahead, his jaw set. The car accelerated. She pressed her hand flat against the door. The gesture she'd learned from Damien, the pressure of a decision working toward resolution, and watched the city moving past and thought about a man in a suit she'd watched leave a safe house with his hand checked twice against the inside of his jacket and a wound that was 9 days old and not yet healed. Walking into a room expecting a conversation and finding Eli and whatever Eli had brought with him and Daniel Cavallo's real intentions and the specific brutal arithmetic of a trap set by someone who had learned leverage from his father and learned it well. The car turned hard onto a bridge. The harbor spread below them, gray and cold and completely indifferent. Torres said, 2 minutes. She had her hand on the door handle. The building came into view. Low, commercial, the kitchen entrance on the south side she could see even from here because the work lights inside were on, and throwing light through the high windows in the specific way of a space where people were present and alert and arranged in formations that had nothing to do with conversation. Torres hadn't fully stopped the car when she had the door open and her feet on the ground and was moving toward the building with the particular focus of someone who had stopped calculating and started acting. Torres was behind her. She could hear him, his footsteps, his breathing, the specific sound of a man who knew how to move quickly and quietly, doing both. He had something in his hand that she didn't look at directly because looking at it would cost her a half-second she didn't have. The south entrance. Service door, metal, slightly ajar. Not locked, not latched. The specific carelessness of people who had come in quickly and hadn't closed it behind them because they weren't planning to leave through it. She pushed it open with her shoulder and stepped into the cold dark of a service corridor that smelled of old grease and industrial cleaner, and underneath both of those, something sharper that she identified and set aside. Voices ahead. The work lights were through the door at the end of the corridor. She could see the quality of the light changing at the threshold, the hard white of industrial fluorescence spilling under the gap, and the voices, 2 of them, and then a third that she knew. Damien. She pushed through the door. The kitchen was large, commercial scale, stainless steel surfaces reflecting the work lights in hard, fractured angles, the equipment pushed to the sides to create a clear space in the center. The clear space contained 4 people. Daniel Cavallo, standing at a table with his hands visible and his face doing the calculation she'd seen in it before. Faster now, recalibrating. 2 men flanking him with the professional positioning of people who had been told to hold until told otherwise. And Damien, standing 8 feet back from the table in the specific posture of a man who had walked into a room and read it in the first 2 seconds and was now running the numbers on what his options were. Eli was standing against the far wall. He looked at her when she came through the door. She had known, intellectually, since Vincent had said it, someone inside close enough to know your schedule, and she had confirmed it in the safe house conversation and carried it in her chest through the drive and the bridge and the last 2 minutes of movement. But seeing him standing there in this room, with this arrangement, did something to her understanding of the last 2 weeks that was irreversible. Every time Eli had stood near a doorway with his professional stillness. Every look exchanged with Damien that she'd read as the shorthand of long trust. 11 years. She looked at Damien. He had turned when she came through the door and his face had done something she felt rather than saw. A rapid, complex thing that moved through the controlled surface and was gone in under a second. His eyes went from her to Torres behind her, and back to her, and then to Cavallo, with a new quality of attention, something recalculated. "Miss Mercer," Cavallo said. His voice was smooth, but she could hear the effort the smoothness was costing. She had come from a direction he hadn't anticipated, which meant she'd been given information he hadn't intended to give her, which meant his father. He was working that out in real time and doing a reasonable job of not showing it. I wasn't expecting you. I know, she said. She looked at Damien. The meeting is not what he said it was, she said. Direct, clear, without the softening of circumspection. Eli has been working with him for 8 months. This room is not a negotiation. The silence that followed had a specific texture. The silence of multiple people recalibrating simultaneously. Everyone in the room running their own version of the numbers. Damien looked at Eli. Eli looked back at him and said nothing. His face was the flat professional face she'd known, and it was, she now understood, not the flatness of a man managing himself, but the flatness of a man who had been managing something else for a very long time and was now standing at the end of it. 11 years, Damien said. The words were quiet. Quieter than anger. The particular register of something that had gone below the level where anger lived. Eli's jaw moved. It wasn't... He stopped, started again. He came to me 8 months ago, said the old arrangement was done, that a new one was coming and I could be on the right side of it, or 8 months, Damien said. I didn't... Another stop. The club wasn't supposed to go that far. I told him your schedule, the location. I told him you'd be there alone. I didn't know they were going to... He looked at Damien's side, at the 9-day-old wound. I didn't know. The room was very quiet. Vivian watched Damien's face. Watched the thing working through him. Not the press of the flat hand against his thigh this time, but something in his chest, in the set of his shoulders, the specific weight of a man holding something that was very heavy and had no good place to set it down. Get out, Damien said. Eli looked at him. I'm not going to... Damien's voice had changed quality again. The older, colder thing she'd heard once before. The thing below the civilized surface. I'm not going to do what you think I'm going to do. Get out of this room. Get out of this city. If I see you again, that changes. Do you understand me? Eli looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across his face. Not relief, not guilt exactly. Something more complicated and more human and more useless. Then he walked toward the service corridor and through the door, and the door swung shut behind him and he was gone, and the particular hole his absence made in the room was the shape of 11 years. Nobody spoke for a moment. Cavallo broke it. That was... he started. Don't, Damien said, and looked at him. Don't say anything for the next 30 seconds. Cavallo looked at him, read something in the look, waited. Damien breathed, in through the nose, out slowly. She recognized it, recognized where he'd learned it, and felt something press hard against her sternum. He stood with his hand against his thigh and worked through whatever he was working through, and when he looked up, his face was the controlled surface again, but carrying its weight differently. Something had been set down, and something else picked up. The photograph, he said. The photograph, Cavallo said carefully. Your father doesn't know where it was taken, Vivian said. He told me. He said you have a photograph and a story, but not a location. Cavallo looked at her sharply. Your father called me, she said, 40 minutes ago, from a number I won't have again. The calculation on Cavallo's face was different now. Younger, she thought, the smooth surface stripped of some of its polish. Under the preparation and the ambition and the leverage manufacturing was a man in his late 30s who had built a strategy on foundations his father had laid and was now discovering the foundations were not what he'd been told. He called you, Cavallo said. He told me what you had and what you didn't, she said. He also told me your real intention for tonight. Cavallo looked at Damien, back at Vivian. His 2 men were still flanking, but the quality of their positioning had shifted. Alert, but uncertain, waiting for instruction that was not coming with its usual authority. I want to talk to him, Damien said. My father. Yes. I told you. I know what you have and what you don't, Damien said. Your leverage is gone, Daniel. You can keep performing, or you can have the actual conversation you said you wanted. He looked at Cavallo steadily. The territory question is real. The business question is real. I'm willing to have that conversation, but not in a kitchen with 2 men at my back. Not tonight. A pause. Your father wants to talk to me. You find a way to make that happen. We sit down, you, me, your father, somewhere nobody has the advantage. And we talk about Boston and Providence and what the next 10 years look like. No weapons, no conditions. He paused. That's my offer. You have 10 seconds to decide if you want it. Cavallo looked at him. The calculation ran. She could almost see it, the weighing of what he'd come in with against what he was standing in now, the gap between them, what it would cost to admit the gap. 5 seconds, Damien said. Okay, Cavallo said. It was not the word of a man who had won. It was the word of a man who had chosen the version of losing that preserved the most. She had the sense, watching him, that somewhere under the ambition and the miscalculation was someone who had genuinely not wanted blood, who had talked himself into the kitchen as a pressure tactic and understood only now the full cost of that decision. Your men leave first, Damien said. Then we talk about how this happens. Cavallo nodded. His men withdrew. The kitchen was quieter with fewer people in it. Torres, who had not moved from just inside the service door since they'd entered, exhaled once, carefully, professionally, and lowered whatever was in his hand. Vivian stood in the hard light of the kitchen and felt, for the first time in what seemed like a very long time, the particular sensation of ground under her feet that was not moving. They were 3 hours in the kitchen. She hadn't expected 3 hours. But Cavallo sat at the table, and Damien sat across from him, and what happened was, to her genuine surprise, a conversation, real, specific, unglamorous in the way that real negotiations were unglamorous. Territory. Revenue. The particular pressure points in Providence where Cavallo's father's arrangements had left gaps that his son was trying to fill. The Boston operations and what they could and couldn't absorb. The way certain arrangements could be structured to give Cavallo what he actually needed without requiring him to take what he'd been trying to take. She sat against the wall and listened. Torres sat near the door. The work lights hummed overhead. At the second hour, Cavallo said, He talks about you, you know, my father, in the few contacts we've had. He looked at Damien. Not warmly, analytically, the way he talks about serious things. A pause. He said you were the best thing he built and the worst thing he left. Damien looked at the table. His hands were flat on the surface. When did he contact you? 2 years ago, Cavallo said. Once. A phone call. He said he knew I was making moves on Boston and told me I was miscalculating the strength of your position. His mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile. I didn't listen. No, Damien said. I'm a fast learner, Cavallo said. Slow starter. There was a pause that had something almost human in it, the specific uncomfortable humor of people who have been trying to kill each other and are sitting at a table instead. I need a number, Damien said, a way to reach him. Not you as intermediary, direct. Cavallo looked at him. He may not. I know he may not. I need the number. A long pause. Then Cavallo reached into his jacket and placed a folded piece of paper on the table. Damien looked at it, did not pick it up immediately, the way she'd looked at the Robinson novel before she'd been ready to open it. Then he picked it up and put it in his pocket, and did not look at it again. Outside, the November night was very cold. The harbor was a quarter-mile away, and she could smell it. That specific cold water smell of salt and industry that was particular to this part of the city. The car was where Torres had left it, angled against the curb with the driver door still not quite closed. She stood on the sidewalk. Damien stood beside her. Cavallo and his men had taken a separate car. She'd watched the lights pull away. And Torres was making a call near the building's corner, giving them a specific radius of space. The city moved around them. A delivery truck 2 blocks over. A plane descending toward Logan, landing lights cutting the dark. The particular ambient sound of Boston at midnight in November, which was not silence, but a low, continuous texture of life organized around other purposes. You came, Damien said. Yes. How did you know? His father called me. He was quiet, looking at the street. He said to tell you something, she said. He looked at her. He said he was sorry, she said. He said you wouldn't believe it, but he wanted me to tell you anyway. The quality of Damien's face in the cold night light was different from any version of it she'd seen before. Not the controlled surface, not the loudness underneath. Something older and quieter, and more exposed than either of those. The face of a 29-year-old who had stood at a false grave and confirmed a false death and picked up an empire he hadn't asked for and carried it for 6 years, visible for a moment through the 38-year-old man who had learned to carry it without showing the weight. It lasted for only a second. Then something settled back in place. Not the control, not the performance, but the genuine resolution of someone who had received something and found a place inside himself to put it. "Does he?" Damien said. "I don't know if he means it," she said. "I only know he said it." "That's something," he said. "That's—" He stopped. "I don't know what that is yet." "You don't have to know yet." He looked at her. "No," he said. "I don't." They stood on the sidewalk in the cold, and she thought about the last 17 days, the ballroom, and the dress she'd worn to her mother's funeral, and the $43 and the restaurant without a sign, and the architectural drawings and the book, and the grief she'd been ready to feel. The safe house, and the photograph, and the kitchen, and 3 hours of real negotiation under fluorescent lights. And before all of it, the specific quality of a life in emergency mode. The electric bill, the overqualified applications, the particular loneliness of someone good at something with nowhere to be good at it. She did not feel like that woman anymore. She was not sure exactly which moment had changed it. Not a single moment, she thought. The accumulation of them. "The Roxbury project," she said. He looked at her. "You need a structural engineer," she said. "Someone who can look at those drawings and tell you what they'll actually cost to build, and how to phase it, so the funding doesn't have to come all at once." She paused. "I'm not a structural engineer, but I know how to work with them, and I know how to read a program, and I know how to manage a project from site plan to occupancy." She looked at him steadily. "I want to work on it, not as a favor, paid, properly, with a contract, like someone who is there because they're qualified and not because of anything else." He was very still. "That building matters," she said. "Someone needs to make sure it gets built the way you designed it. Not a compromised version, not a value-engineered version. The actual thing." He looked at her for a long moment. "You'd be taking on a client with a complicated name." "I've been managing complicated things for 17 days, she said. "I think I can manage a complicated client." Something moved across his face. That almost smile, the real one. The surprised one that he didn't prepare. It was different in the cold night air outside a commercial kitchen in East Boston than it had been across a ballroom in the Harrington Grand. Less polished, less framed, more like a thing that simply happened to his face because it couldn't not. "Yes," he said. "Yes what?" "Yes to the project," he said. "Yes to the contract. Yes to all of it." He paused. "Yes." She looked at him. At the man she'd carried a photograph for and stopped a trap for and stood in a kitchen for 3 hours for. At the man who had found the exact book she needed to grieve her mother and described Taraondo with genuine emotion and designed a building in Roxbury out of honest materials because the neighborhood deserved honesty. At the man who had a piece of paper in his pocket with a phone number he didn't know yet whether he had the courage to dial. "Good," she said. 6 months moved through Boston the way seasons did, not in discrete steps, but in the continuous gradual accumulation of changed light and changed temperature, and the slow emergence of things that had been waiting under other things for the right conditions. The Roxbury project broke ground in April. It was not a ceremony. Damien had been specific about that, had refused the photo opportunity and the press release and the kind of public announcement that would attach his name to the building in ways that would complicate what the building was trying to be. Instead, it was a Tuesday morning with a small crew and a site supervisor named Carol, who had been building things in Boston for 27 years, and who looked at the drawings and said, "This is serious work," in the tone of someone who did not say that often. Vivian was there. She stood on the frozen dirt of the site in her work boots with her coffee and watched the first machinery move and felt something in her chest that was not complicated, clean and simple and warm, the particular satisfaction of a good thing beginning. She had an office now, a real one, shared with 2 other independent consultants in a building in the South End. Her name on the door, her contracts filed, her invoices paid on time by a client whose name gave some people pause, and who had, in 6 months, not once asked her to compromise the design for cost or convenience or any of the other pressures that typically worked on buildings between conception and reality. She had finished the novel. Not the dark fairy tale retellings she'd been picking at for 2 years. Those had broken open during the weeks in the safe house and come out in a different shape, something raw and more specific. A collection of stories about women in impossible positions making the choices available to them and living with what those choices cost. She had sent it to 3 publishers in March and received, in April, a response from a small press in New York that used words like urgent and necessary and when can we talk. She had talked to them. She was talking to them still. Damien had dialed the number from the piece of paper on a Sunday morning in January. She had not been in the room for this, had been in the kitchen, had made coffee, had stood with her back against the counter and heard, from the study, the particular quality of silence that meant a phone ringing somewhere. And then, after a pause that she counted, 12 seconds, the different quality of silence that meant it had been answered. He had been in the study for 2 hours. When he came out, his face was the version she'd learned to read as genuinely exposed. The structural thing removed, the 29-year-old visible through the 38-year-old, the weight redistributed rather than set down. He had not told her what was said. She had not asked. She had handed him his coffee and sat across from him at the kitchen table, and they had been there together in the specific quiet of 2 people who understood that some things needed to be held privately before they could be spoken. He had told her gradually over the following weeks, in pieces, in the way important things came out, not in a single delivered account, but in fragments, in the context of other conversations, in the specific way that trauma organized itself for telling. His father had not come back to Boston. That was not part of this. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Certainly not on any timeline Damien controlled. But he was alive, and Damien knew it, and they had spoken, and whatever had been said in those 2 hours had done something to the way Damien moved through his days. Not lighter exactly. More accurate. Like a structure that had been built to account for a load it was no longer carrying. The adjustment visible in the efficiency, the absence of the unnecessary bracing. The operation itself was changing. Slowly, deliberately, in the specific way that large things changed when someone with the authority to change them decided to and had the patience to do it by degrees. Territory folded back, certain arrangements concluded, legitimate interests expanded into the space. It was not a transformation. Vivian was honest with herself about that. Had been honest from the beginning. It was a direction. A choice made and remade every day, in the particular way that real choices worked. She had met Vincent once more, in February, at the kitchen table of the Charlestown safe house over coffee that was better than the first time. He had looked at her across the table with the same assessment she remembered and said, without preamble, "You're still here." "Yes," she said. "Good," he said. He had not elaborated. She had not asked him to. The Daniel Cavallo situation had resolved into something she would not have predicted from that kitchen in East Boston. Not friendship, not trust, but the specific workable détente of people who had looked at each other clearly and found the exchange of mutual interest more valuable than continued conflict. The meeting had happened in February, a third location, a conference room in a Providence hotel, Vincent present on Damien's side, and an older man she didn't recognize on Cavallo's. It had lasted 4 hours and produced an arrangement that nobody loved entirely and everyone could live with, which was, Vincent told her afterward, the definition of a functional negotiation. Eli had left the city. She didn't know where. She thought about him sometimes, but not with anger, which surprised her, but with the particular complicated understanding of someone who had learned that people did things under pressure that they would not have chosen in better conditions, and that this did not resolve the damage those things caused, and that both of those statements were true simultaneously and did not cancel each other out. The evening in late May, when Damien took her to the coastal estate in Gloucester, the Atlantic was doing what the Atlantic did in late May, gray and silver and enormous, with a quality of light that was not quite warm but was moving in that direction, the specific light of a season arriving rather than established. The terrace faced east, which meant the horizon was clean. Nothing between them and the open water, just the flat line where the sky met the ocean and the particular endlessness of that. She had been to the estate before. 3 times. It was the place where she felt most clearly the gap between the world Damien inhabited and the world she had come from. Not uncomfortable, but present. A gap she had decided to acknowledge rather than paper over, because papering over gaps was how structures failed. They had been there an hour. Dinner inside first. Torres had cooked, which was something she had not expected when she'd learned that Torres had this capacity, had laughed at the improbability of it, and Torres had looked at her with the expression of a man who did not find it improbable at all and was reserving judgment on her reaction. The food had been extraordinary. She had told him so. He had accepted this with 11 words. Now they were on the terrace. The water below the cliff was moving in its slow coastal rhythm. The particular sound of waves against rock that was not the sound of waves against sand, heavier and more deliberate. She had her hands on the railing. The air smelled of salt and the early warmth of a season turning. She heard him behind her, the specific quality of his movement, which she knew now the way you knew a familiar room in the dark. And then he was beside her at the railing, looking at the water with the quality of attention he brought to things he found genuinely worth attending. "I want to ask you something," he said. She looked at him. He was looking at the water, not at her, which was unusual enough that she registered it. "Okay," she said. He turned and looked at her. Then he did something she had not seen him do in any of the contexts she had known him. He lowered himself, carefully, to one knee on the stone terrace, with the specific care of a man whose left side had healed in the last 5 months, but carried a scar that reminded him daily of its existence. She looked at him. He looked at her. No performance, no prepared phrasing. The face she knew, the real one, the structural thing removed, all of it present. In his hand was something small, a ring, she registered, and then stopped registering its specifics because what mattered was not the object but the man holding it, kneeling on a stone terrace with the Atlantic behind him in the late May light. "I'm not offering you safety," he said. "I don't have that to offer, and I won't pretend I do. I'm not offering you ease or simplicity or a life without complication." He paused. "I'm offering you the real version, the one where we build the things we want to build and face the things we have to face and don't pretend either of those is simple." Another pause. Shorter. "I want you beside me for that. Not because you need me, not because I rescued anything, because you chose this with your eyes open, and I want to spend whatever comes next being the person who is worth that choice." She looked at him for a moment. At the man who had crossed a ballroom for reasons he hadn't fully understood, and had, she thought, understood them better since. Who had found her the exact book she needed and listened to her at 2 a.m. on a couch, while Torres checked a wound and stood between her and a door she'd been offered and kept not taking. Who had a scar on his left side and a piece of paper that had been a phone number, and a father who was alive somewhere warm in a building going up in Roxbury out of honest materials. Who had needed someone to see him clearly and had, against all probability, found the person willing to do it. She thought about what she'd said on a cold sidewalk outside a kitchen in East Boston. "I've been in emergency mode for so long, I can't remember what the other mode feels like." 6 months later, she knew what the other mode felt like. It felt like this, like standing on a terrace above the Atlantic in late May with the city behind her and a real future in front of her, that she had not waited to be given, but had built, piece by piece, out of the choices she'd made with her eyes open. She reached down and took the ring from his hand. She looked at it. Then she put it on herself, which made him exhale once, surprised. The specific sound of someone who had prepared for various responses and not quite prepared for this one. "Get up," she said. "Your side." He got up. He was looking at her with something she had a word for now, had found it somewhere in the last 6 months, in the specific vocabulary of what she'd been learning about herself and about what she was capable of choosing. It was not a complicated word. It was the oldest one available. "Yes," she said. "To all of it, the real version." He put his hand against her jaw, mirroring the gesture she'd made in the safe house, she understood, the reciprocal of it. And she turned her face into it slightly, the way you turn toward warmth. Behind them, somewhere inside the house, she heard Torres say something and Marcus respond, and the particular ambient sound of people who had been through something together moving around a shared space. In front of them, the Atlantic did what the Atlantic did, vast and indifferent and continuous, the horizon clean and clear, and offering nothing except the fact of its endlessness, which was, she thought, exactly enough. She was not a woman who had been rescued. She was a woman who had walked into a burning building with her eyes open and come out the other side knowing something about herself she had not known before, that she was capable of more than survival, that she had always been capable of more than survival, that it had taken a particular collision of circumstances and a particular man and a series of decisions made under pressure to show her what she already had. She had chosen this, every piece of it. And the choosing was the thing. Not the outcome, not the arrival, but the repeated daily act of deciding that what she was building was worth the cost of building it. The light was going now, the silver gray of the water deepening toward dark, the first lights of distant boats appearing on the horizon like punctuation. She leaned against the railing with her ring on her finger and the man she had chosen standing beside her and felt the particular quietness of a story that had resolved into something real. Not a happy ending, which was a category she had never fully trusted, but a true one. A beginning, actually. Wearing the shape of an ending, just like all the best ones did.